Okay, hopefully we're getting started here. Just want to remind people that if you're just joining me right now, I've always tried to start these just a couple minutes early. Mainly, it just kind of gives me a little bit of cushion in case I have a technical problem when I'm getting set up here at the studio. This is, my name's Glenn Morgan. This is We the Governed, and hopefully you're willfully and purposely tuning into the live stream. Ask Me Anything right now. And this is the week of Thanksgiving, so I wouldn't be surprised if a number of you are who regularly log on to this live stream. You might be out getting ready for Thanksgiving or running around doing some last minute shopping, so in which case it's no problem. But if you're new to this, just a real quick update. If you want to ask me a question, then depending on how it looks on your screen, you might be going here to this side of the screen or that side. It kind of depends on what type of format you're looking at this video on. But you can type in questions and I will see those questions right here, and I'll try to get to them roughly in the order that people post them up. Try to just ask questions. If you have commentary with other people, that's fine. There's usually a lot of that kind of chatter that goes on in the comment section, but it's easier for me to pick out questions if I can see them. If it says at We the Govern, it just kind of pops out a little bit when I'm looking at the screen. Just a real quick idea. This is what the questions are going to look like when I'm trying to answer them, and this will probably be the first question I get to, but you'll see them on the screen like that, and then I'll be trying to do my best to answer them. No guarantees I do a good job, but I'll do my best, and in an effort to get to the point of whatever the question is. And then if you think I did a terrible job, feel free to tell me so, and I could try it again later on in the program. Usually what happens when I'm doing this is there's a ton of questions that flood in at the end. So I am going to do my best if one person's asking a ton of questions and it seems to be bogging things down a little bit. I may skip ahead and just try to get to some of the other questions. That way more people get their questions answered, or at least they have the ability to throw it in. And we'll just see what happens. With that, the core kind of announcement that I had, or at least explanation for today's live stream, a lot of that had to do with just the question of what will the Ferguson administration be attempting to conceal from the Trump administration moving forward. And believe it or not, this is actually a fairly significant question and one that's worth reviewing, because inevitably what happens is you're going to have a weirdly confrontational event is essentially happening here with the Trump administration taking office in January, and not that Ferguson's the only one doing this, but as a newly elected governor, Ferguson's is already coming out and defined himself with his relationship to Trump. I mean, he's truly a guy that has an unusual fixation on Trump and has defined his entire political career, at least for the last 8 years, around Trump. And he appears to just be unable to shake off this kind of Trump derangement syndrome that he suffers from. And so, for good or bad, that just seems to be how Ferguson's going to be approaching things. The thing is, he's not alone. So you're going to see the Trump administration isn't going to pay necessarily as much attention to Ferguson as he'd like as they might to Newsom or the governor of Oregon or the Illinois or Michigan or the city of Denver or Massachusetts. A couple of these other kind of leftist strongholds where there does seem to be some kind of insurrectionist, for lack of a better term, or secessionist sort of behavior by the Democrats that are in charge there. So the clash that kind of this federalism sort of clash is going to occur at those levels. So Ferguson, though, seems bound and determined to kind of be the ankle biter out of Washington State, who's going to try to demonstrate his antithesis to the Trump administration. Now, essentially what it comes down to initially is going to be his opposition. Actually, there's what one part of that's going to be what Ferguson says that he's doing, and the other part is going to be clearly where there is going to be clear conflicts, because one of the weirder elements of the kind of leftist opposition to Trump that has gone on is this whole Planned Parenthood abortion obsession that they've gone through. And it's kind of funny because, frankly, the weird obsession with that the left has in our state in particular, it's the only positive polling message that they had on anything, any subject lately. And so this is what they want to spend a bunch of time talking about and being worried about. But I don't see any significant changes coming from the Trump administration, certainly not anytime soon, as it deals with abortion in Washington state. I mean, essentially, the Roe v. Wade drama that the left has hyped up its entire existence over just returns things back to the states. So a state like Washington really has the ability to kill babies endlessly anyway and often as many times as they possibly can. And that'll be a contrast to perhaps Idaho next door, or even in states like North Dakota or Oklahoma or other states, Georgia. You'll have differences in these other states, but essentially Roe v. Wade just kicks it out to the state. And so you'll have a bunch of people posing and pretending like their positions on abortion are the biggest defining parts of who they were, but nothing's really going to happen here. So they're going to have to really create a lot of fiction and drama out of nothing in order to pretend like they have something to do with that issue, which is going to be probably the initial stage of where they're going. Now, if they decide to redefine that as defending boys playing in girls' sports, that's going to be a different animal, because I do think that has generated a lot of backlash. If you've been at some of the races that I've been at and you've observed how annoyed, and when I say races, I'm talking cross country and track at a girls' high school level, and you've seen a couple of these boys jumping in there and claiming they're girls and then essentially taking away trophies and positions at state from other girls that earned those positions, then you're going to, or those winning championships, even in the case of the 400 last year. I'm looking at a lot of these girl athletes, and they're super pissed off. So they're very angry. They're very frustrated. They're not happy about this at all. And they certainly view the adults who are pushing these programs as crazies and not on their side. So why the Democrats have decided that this is one of the hills they feel like dying on, I can't explain it super well. But when it comes to the obsession of pronouns, I don't relate to that either. So, and you can go to a Democrat Party function and see them obsess about pronouns, sometimes for a long, long time before they can get their meeting started. So that clearly is something that the party's decided to align itself with, which includes Bob Ferguson. I just, that could be some kind of drama where they could have the social drama around that. But the big issues that I think are going to be much more impactful from just a practical policy standpoint, and that would include the primary things that somebody like a Bob Ferguson would want to cover up, is the problems that basically have never been investigated in Washington State when it comes to public integrity cases. And remember, Bob Ferguson's been in the Attorney General's office for 12 years. Before him, you had a small interlude where you had a Republican that was in the AG's office, but the Republican made the mistake of not getting rid of any of the previous attorneys there who had been under the Gregoire administration before that. So you had this you had a real problem in the Attorney General's office, basically, of decades, where they've basically refused to look at almost any public integrity case of any kind that's ever come up in the state of Washington. Combine that with the fact that the auditor's office, I'm going to put air quotes around the state auditor, they don't really audit in the sense of what the average citizen would imagine an audit looks like. And so because of that, there's a lot of fraud, there's a lot of corruption, there's a lot of grifting operations, there's a lot of both obviously corrupt and dishonest and criminal activity is shading into kind of a gray, nebulous, it's immoral or dishonest, but is it actually breaking the law question with a lot of these agencies, and just the billions of dollars that flow through all these different programs, federal grants, federal monies, state grants, local grants, kickback grants. I mean, all kinds of stuff that it's just it's a ocean of cash that flows through all these programs, and everybody's got their hand in in the stream, just basically feeding off the gravy train of your tax dollars. And there's a lot of corruption inevitably that's involved in that. And because nobody's ever looked, the Attorney General has been entirely away without leave. I mean, they don't pay any attention to the corruption at all. They look the other way. And in fact, Bob Ferguson's office is oftentimes, when he was Attorney General there, as the previous Attorney Generals are required to do, they have to defend the state whenever the state gets in trouble, and that oftentimes involves bad behavior by the state. So that's why Bob Ferguson's attorneys are known and well known in that office for destroying public records, trying to hide the truth, concealing and hiding stuff from the public. We'll never know all the true scandals that they covered up at the state agencies. But since there's a lot of federal funds that flow into these state agencies, it gives the feds the opportunity to look into things that nobody's ever bothered to look at before. And inevitably, this is going to be where the corrupt and the dishonest are going to want to start really focusing on covering up and shredding and disappearing the money trail as best they can so that people aren't aware of some of the bad behavior that's gone on. And I'm fairly certain that Bob Ferguson's got his awareness around that. It doesn't mean Bob Ferguson himself has taken has stolen money, or that he's sent it to his wife or anything like that. That doesn't. I'm not aware of that specifically happening. But in a lot of these agencies, there's going to be and nonprofits and grants and all these other things. It's not just the Department of Employment Services that loses $600 million randomly. It's plenty of other agencies that have all kinds of skeletons in the closet, and you're going to see. Since Ferguson's coming from essentially inside the executive branch of government, yes, he's an independently elected attorney general, but he's been defending whatever Inslee's bad behavior was, and now he's taking over after Inslee, just like Inslee took over after Gregoire, and covering up the previous administration's corruption and criminal activity is usually going to be part of what comes with the territory. So I think there's a lot that he'd have to cover and a lot to conceal. I would particularly indicate the most likely area where big dollar theft and corruption has occurred is probably in DSHS, which is one of the biggest grant recipients, social and health services. It's essentially the state agency that processes all the federal welfare sort of payments that go through there, and digging into the complete and total failure of the state to actually uncover fraud, which they're supposed to do in that agency, because they have incentive not to uncover it, because by uncovering it, you have to reduce how much the feds give you next year. So there's this built-in system that it reduces the likelihood that anybody's going to actually truly catch fraud. So I would guess that that basically he's going to be trying to cover up that kind of stuff. Now, you're also going to have some other things, I suspect, that come out of this Act Blue investigation that is going on at the federal level, which we've tried to initiate a lot of work here in the state a year ago when we first started digging into the Act Blue scandal. And I had first come across it back in 2012-14 when I worked at the Freedom Foundation. I dug into some of that stuff. That's the topic of a video that I filmed today that'll come out in a little while. But, essentially, Bill Brooks' Substack article about this is actually really significant, where it outlines the clear and obvious weird, what appears to be like a money laundering operation, which would basically function. The laws that are broken there are essentially concealing true source of funds, possibly hiding foreign government investment of funds into the political process, which is completely illegal, and smurfing, or basically using people without their knowledge, their ID essentially as a pass-through window to funnel a lot of cash into political causes. And it's kind of it's a very complex issue. I address it, I think, pretty well in the video that I put out, but because of the problems that we've been exposing for the last year and a half or so, as we're downloading daily, multiple times a day, sometimes the database, just the historical database from 2017 to 2022, for example, and these massive volume of thousands and tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of transactions changing every day, and something that is a settled campaign from long ago, it's clearly indicative of a big problem. And when you file complaints to the FEC, because the data changes all the time, whatever the data points that you use in your original complaint, they won't match what the FEC finally gets around to looking at in a year or two when they decide to investigate your complaint, which is one of the problems that you're going to be running into there. So all of that, that's going to be something that I think you're going to see Bob Ferguson probably involved in. Also, I do believe there's a number of other scandals and dramas that he's probably covered up or aware of, and at least looked the other way if he didn't actively involve himself in the cover-up. And now as you're stepping into the new administration, you're essentially just inheriting all the old workers there and people who have ossified and fossilized into office for so long, and senior level and senior positions, these bureaucracies, they know how to run the system in a way that profits them. Money, power, and control tends to drive the political process. No different with Ferguson and with the crew that's going to be inevitably in conflict with the feds. Now, this presumes, and it's a big presumption, but one that is implied right now based on the statements that I've been hearing, that they're going to be appointing some aggressive U.S. attorneys in both the Seattle and the Spokane offices. And we've historically not had that. One thing I failed to address last time, and I tried to bring it up a little bit more in a video that I did today that should launch tomorrow, but whenever proposed appointment comes for either federal judges at a lower federal court and appellate court if it comes from our state, and any U.S. attorneys that come from out here, typically there's a process that the federal senators, in this case Cantwell and Murray, they have kind of a prerogative. It's like the senators give it. It's like a little privilege that they have, where they can issue a blue card or blue slip. I think it's what they call it, blue slip, and they can say no, I don't want that person, or refuse to put the slip in. And traditionally, even though they're from the opposite party, that's often honored by the other members of the Senate as just this historic prerogative that federal senators have in order to have some influence or control over who exactly gets appointed in their state. Now, I've read about this a little bit recently, a little bit more in depth, and it's not an absolute set in stone law. It's clearly something that's become a historic kind of privilege that the senators have given themselves. But because of this kind of collapsing problem with obstruction and other issues, I could completely see where in cases of blue states, especially hostile states like one that Washington State will be, at least to the Trump administration, where they decide to blow through that prerogative and say, listen, we're not going to apply for it here for the first time in half a century. We're actually going to get maybe some people in these positions that are willing to actually and genuinely go in here and look at corruption and not just protect walking on eggshells. The political class and the corruption that they've accepted is just part of what it's like to swim in the deep waters of Puget Sound. And I'm very interested in seeing who they appoint. We'll learn everything based on who they appoint. If they appoint aggressive people, then investigations are following. I think you would also see, related to that, possible civil rights lawsuits, or at least signing on as to existing civil rights cases against the Ferguson administration, probably on the First Amendment type issues with his attempt to suppress free speech, which has never really, it's gained some traction, but it's got money involved in it. And it's they had that meeting recently where at the Bob Ferguson's office down in Seattle, a public meeting, and then you also have the Second Amendment issues, which are obvious because they're in conflict with federal rulings of the Supreme Court, and then you potentially have some Fourth, Fifth Amendment type cases as it relates to property rights abuses, probably through the Growth Management Act or the attack on landlords in Washington State. Really, it's an open door for civil rights cases if Pam Bondi is the new Attorney General at the federal level and is in charge of the Department of Justice. And frankly, if Ferguson decides that he's going to be the guy most obnoxious and annoying to the Ferguson administration, or to the Trump administration, I don't think he necessarily will be. But if he is, then that's probably going to help us in the state, because that means that they're going to dedicate a lot more resources to coming out here and trying to address these issues. So let's get to some of these questions right now, and I will do my best to answer them if I can, as the questions are starting to pile up. So first question here, let me put it on the screen if I can. First question here is from Sanera Frankenstein, saying that counties in Illinois and California are now considering seceding from their states. What are the literal steps Washington counties must take to initiate this process? And I want out. Well, the truth is, I think you see this in upstate New York, you see this in Illinois, you see this in Oregon, Washington, California, There's also, I think Michigan has had this process pop up as well. Other states have done this. Now, people who are familiar know this hasn't actually been successful since the 1860s during the Civil War when West Virginia broke away from Virginia. That's really the only time that we've got a really good example of this. You do have territories before they became states when they were setting boundaries, like between Oregon and Washington and Idaho, for example, where states were being kind of determined at that point in time. But you really haven't had a state separate, except for the West Virginia example back in the 1860s. So it's been a long time. I mean, it's 150 years, and it hasn't happened since. And the reason for that is that the process is much more complex than that, and there's a political element to this as well. The decisions on you basically have to have agreement in the state, and you also are going to have agreement at the federal level. And really, the federal level is the hardest one to get because it's usually a quid pro quo decision when they're going to, at least the discussions I've heard about this before. I mean, the Congress is going to have to say, yeah, go ahead, Washington, you can break apart. And the Democrats are not going to want that to happen in D.C. because they want to have their guaranteed two senators. It's really more in the Senate that this matters more than it does in the House. And so they're going to be nervous about that, and they're going to probably want to resist that if they can. Then you're going to have this kind of quid pro quo kind of conversation. They'll say, okay, well, if we're going to do that, then we want statehood for Washington, D.C., for example, or Puerto Rico, for example. And, and Republicans are usually egregiously incompetent, pretty stupid, very short-sighted, and some of the worst negotiators in modern political history. So if they get involved in that kind of negotiation, I'm not sure they'll come out with anything that borders an intelligent approach to what's going on. And that's going to be kind of you have to line up all these other pieces. Now, the Oregon counties have gone the furthest, where they've officially said they want to become part of Idaho, which is arguably a little bit easier because you're essentially shifting the control of these counties. You aren't making a new state. You're simply moving the boundary of the existing state. But again, both states have to agree. If there's big conflict, it isn't going to happen. And the legislature in Oregon is never going to agree to that, just like the legislature in California isn't going to agree to splitting up as well. But it always happens as the left goes crazier and they destroy their cities. The people who live in the rest of the state want to separate from Crazy Town. And so they want to separate from Seattle and Washington. They want to separate from Portland in Oregon. They want to separate from San Francisco and L.A. in California. They want to separate from Chicago in Illinois. They want to separate from New York City in upstate New York. They want to separate from Detroit and maybe Flint in Michigan. I mean, it's an endless fight and battle, and this has been going on since long before anybody watching this video has been alive or were born. It's been happening for a long time. So the question is, how far can you go down that road, and how likely is it to succeed? I think the likelihood of it succeeding is very low, but that's, you're generally going to be looking at some kind of process like that. Well, let's see. John McElfresh, what happened with the complaint against Ferguson's conduct at the start of the elections? Nothing is what happened to that. That was the malfeasance case that he had, and people believed that under the statute they could get him to somehow magically disappear off the ballot for that. I've never seen that work. I'm familiar with the statute. There's some legal hurdles you have to jump through that I don't know are jumped through, and I'm not sure that that's going to work out the way that people hoped it would. However, if it annoys Ferguson and frustrates him and makes him respond in any way at all, I always see that as a positive thing. When I had filed a PDC complaint against Ferguson in the past, he didn't appreciate that too much at the time either, and he kind of had a little weird panic mode at the time. This is going back a number of years, 2017 if I remember right, but and rolled into 2018. And the problem that I had is I couldn't find, I actually had standing to sue Ferguson, and I couldn't get a single attorney in the state of Washington willing to actually help in that. So that was kind of a waste of time, although I'm sure Ferguson really took me off his Christmas card list after that. Jason Fisher, hey Glenn, if you were advising Ferguson, what would be the things to focus on in the start? It seems like Trump is living in his mind rent-free. It is, and I mean, here's the thing, and I can give this advice freely because I know Ferguson's not going to listen or care, but it is the height of political insanity, I think, to do what Ferguson's doing, which is equivalently to like George Wallace in 1963 down in Alabama, right? Stand in the courthouse doors saying, "I will not let these violent sex offenders and drug cartel members and rapists and criminals go. I'm going to hold on to them for dear life and give them benefits so that Trump doesn't deport them." That just seems like a losing political campaign and approach to me. But if that's the hill that Ferguson wants to die on, I would say go for it. And you're right. I mean, Trump lives in his head like I've never seen any politician live in another's head before. But then again, Ferguson's not the only one with Trump derangement syndrome. He's just the one that happens to be in our state. I say the more Trump can distract him and keep him from abusing us, the better off we all are. And so the more chaos that gets dumped on Ferguson's head for his weirdness, that's great. However, let's just say that you had somebody sane and maybe semi-honest in that position, and they weren't as crazy as Ferguson seems like he is. Normally, what you would do is you would have to say, okay, come on, we're not going to want to protect or keep the violent sex predators, the criminals, the drug addicts, the drug dealers, the gang members, the crazy bad people that are here illegally. What we want to do is we're going to try to find somebody that came here with illegally, but they've been here 15 years and they have some kids and they're a productive member of society and they run out of business and something like that. That's what you do, is you go and pretend like you're going to try to protect them. That's what he should do. And I mean, I know they're going to use examples like that, but the reality is I think the Trump administration is going to have its hands full for at least this first year deporting some of the worst of the worst that have come over here in the state. Now, it could be that Ferguson's worried about losing some of his voting base, but because most of these people are registered to vote, even if they're here illegally. And this has come up. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's just a fact. Talk to anybody that's here who's not a U.S. citizen. If they bother to get a driver's license, they somehow got any other benefits, they've been signed up to vote. In almost every case, it takes a lot of work. The Department of Licensing employees have told me that they'll get fired if they don't just sign up everybody to vote automatically, even if they request not to be signed up to vote. We had that case out of Colville where the Secretary of State's emails clearly revealed that they were registering non-U.S. citizens to vote out there. I mean, this is going on. Ferguson, how much does he actually depend on the non-U.S. citizen to voting? I don't know, but it is an easy thing, by the way. This is, if I was the Department of Homeland Security, which controls these lists, I would definitely be making public the legal citizen list, even if it's not the deportation list, just the legal citizen list of people who are here legally. They can be here. There's nothing wrong with it. But green card, H-1B visa, F-1 visa, student visa, work visa, no reason to keep it secret. These people are here fine. There's nothing illegal about them being here. But the question is, how many of them are registered to vote? How many of them voted or had somebody vote for them? How many of them made campaign contributions? And to whom did they make that money? The reason why I'd want to know that is that I would make them have that money refunded. But that would be just a fun game that I would have with the PDC and FEC complaints. The non-U.S. citizens that give that money, campaign contributions, they don't get in trouble, but the people who accepted it have to refund the money. And I'd be happy to go down that road and push it. So that's just an example. But Ferguson isn't going to take my advice. He wisely campaigned pretending to be the public safety guy, but that's so not who he is, that he shifted immediately back into this I love criminal world where he lives normally. And so I just don't think that's going to go down as well as he seems to think. Rex here with Bob Ferguson being the wild turkey. Yeah. No, I don't see any of this stuff happening here, Rex. It is funny, but I know we are approaching Thanksgiving, but I just don't see it happening. Jason, you got another question here, and since your question is up, and I've got a number of them, but I'll jump into yours next. In your opinion, will the Oregon Court of Appeals overturn an injunction for permit to purchase passed in 2022? It's poorly written. You'd have to write everything on note cards. I don't know, and that's a good question. I'm actually less familiar with the Oregon courts. I'm presuming that they're about as crazy as the judges in Washington State. We obviously have a lack of judicial honesty, or judges that probably have no idea what a woman is, don't believe math is real, probably don't even believe the Constitution's real. It's very hard to get a good hearing when you have that kind of judicial system, so I'm not sure what they'll do, but that's a good question, and it's something people should be paying attention to. Again, I do think that with Pam Bondi coming in, despite some of the 2A crew not as happy with the fact that she defended California's red flag laws, among other things that she did when she was the AG in Florida. I said California, didn't I? I meant Florida because she's a former attorney general from Florida. But if the Trump administration says, "Hey, I'm annoyed, Ferguson's a jerk. Let's go out there and start really paying attention and filing some civil rights action cases against this guy for his abuses," then Second Amendment cases seem like they'd be in that pipeline. The First Amendment cases certainly would be, and as I mentioned earlier, I think some of these Fourth and Fifth Amendment cases could be, depending on how you look at some of the crazier abuses of property rights that have been going on. Star, do you think federal funding will be stopped and sanctuary cities abolished? Great question. And the choice to abolish a sanctuary city policy or not is ultimately going to be up to that city jurisdiction. I don't think that even if it's an illegal ordinance, and obviously it's a suspect and questionable approach to running local government. I mean, even as a pro-federalist sort of guy, particularly the reason that they chose the sanctuary city status is so weird. I can totally see that you would want to say, listen, we're going to make ourselves support something that doesn't have as clear a federal nexus, but immigration is a clear and obvious federal nexus. There's no way that you can pretend that somehow the federal government shouldn't have any control over who comes in or out of the country. It's been that since the foundation of the country, really. So it's pretty weird that they would think that this is this battle that they want to fight. But let's just say it is. One of the discussed policies could be that federal funding is going to be removed from jurisdictions who decide they're going to go down the sanctuary yellow brick road and turn themselves into, operation zones for the Mexican drug cartels and violent criminals, which is essentially what you're going to do now. Because with this first wave of deportations, presuming that they're represented accurately on who they're going to focus on and target with these initial deportations, it's going to be the violent criminals, the sex offenders, the murderers, the rapists, the gang members, the people running child sex trafficking rings. And even though all these people probably would vote Democrat and the Democrats like having those people around, I don't think that's a winning political strategy. And so when you set yourself up like the city of Denver, where you're going to say, we're going to be a magnet for these people, come here and you'll be safe. On one hand, I'm almost wondering if the Department of Homeland Security rattles their cage so much that they, like you got that complete clown that's the mayor of Denver, and he jumps up and he says, come here, all you criminals, we'll protect you. And the Homeland Security sits back and ICE says, this is great. They're all going to come into one place. And now our deportation strategy is really easy. We really come in and we can get rid of a high concentration of bad guys all at once in a place that's advertised and collected them in. So if they're running some type of operation like that at ICE, that's pretty funny. Washington State could potentially fall into that trap. You do have the likelihood within Washington that despite the braggadocio sort of attitude that Bob Ferguson has, you're still going to have sheriffs and locally elected government bodies that aren't going to go down with the ship. They're just not going to go down with Ferguson's crazy policies. So without throwing anybody particularly under the bus, but I would say, say Franklin County or Stevens County or even Lewis County and Cowlitz County, places like that, I could totally see him saying, Skamania, Klickitat, right, all these counties saying, we don't care what Bob Ferguson's saying. When we identify bad, violent criminals here or who are illegal aliens, we're letting ICE know right away, and they can deport them. It saves us money, gets them out of our hair, protects our citizens. Why would they not do that? For Ferguson to try to intervene and send the state patrol down or whatever he thinks he's going to do to try to prevent those local jurisdictions from doing it, I just think that's going to be like trying to put your finger in the dike. I think it's going to be leaking all over the place. Now in Seattle may turn into the mecca of crime and criminals even more than it is today. And so he may import just a massive number coming into that part of the state. But for the rest of the state, I'm not sure how well it's going to work. And we'll just have to see. But it's let's just say they start cutting off funding. If they really do, I'll be impressed. But I'm kind of hoping they cut off funding no matter what, the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, right, assuming that Musk and Vivek actually kind of truly run through that program, and they're let's think about the significance of this. They say, when I say they, I'm talking about Musk and Vivek. Musk came out and said, hey, $2 trillion cut, which is the deficit, right? That's the deficit. They're spending $2 trillion more dollars than they have this year. So cutting $2 trillion would make a difference, genuinely would. But there's no way to cut $2 trillion unless you go far and you're going to have to downsize like massively the government bureaucracy in a lot of ways, which I'm a fan of. But so cutting off sanctuary states and cities to their funding is probably no brainer. But some of that funding might be getting cut off anyway. Certainly the grant grifting operations and the big ridiculous kickback schemes and a lot of other things that are going to be cut. I mean, they're just so significant and huge that there's an impact coming no matter what. And despite brave talk from people like Ferguson, the reality is Washington State can't print more money, and when that federal funds go away, it's the long knives come out between the agencies, and they do have to start fighting each other over who gets what. And I suspect that's going to basically, keep going down. Mark Bone, you say there's no statute of limitations on fraud. Actually, I think there is a statute of limitations on it, but it's going to vary by the type. And sometimes statute of limitations depends on discovery, which might be what you're referencing. If somebody finds fraud and then they don't prosecute it for a long time, it's documented, it's been found, then I believe there is statute of limitations on it. Murder, there's no statute of limitations on, but fraud, I believe that there is. There's different categories of fraud, and we'll just have to see the significance of the fraud that we find in Washington State. And keep in mind, there's a clear public integrity nexus from the federal government in their historic willingness to dig into fraud at a local level. And part of it's this funneling of federal funds that gives them the nexus into any program that accepts federal funding, and it becomes part of the universe and operation of that government program. The other thing that affects the fraud levels would be just any type of public integrity fraud that the local law enforcement's either unwilling or corrupted, and to the point that they won't prosecute. That kind of opens the door to the feds. Also, technically anything above $5,000 of theft in those two categories would fall. So they wouldn't go after anybody for less than $5,000, but if it's more than $5,000, technically that's what triggers it. Now, I don't see anytime soon the federal government involving itself in investigations of $5,500 thefts, right? That would be, every bureaucrat in the state would be in jail for that. So you'd have to really, they'll have to pick and choose the big things and then probably work their way down on it. Let's see. Valerie Swanson, Washington State's going to regret their vote for Ferguson. I don't know. Some people will. We'll see. Some will say, hey, that's the only way I could steal the money that I need to keep stealing from government or through my grant grifting operation here. So they're happy that they voted for Ferguson. But I'm sure there's plenty of people that have no idea why they voted for him, and they'll be just as mystified when criminals come and kick in their front door, or they're not able to buy a gun to defend themselves, and they'll wonder, how did that happen? Well, Ferguson should be Exhibit A. Tom 4, is there going to be an increase in the .494 gasoline tax? Does the carbon tax impact that directly, or is that a separate line item? Great question, Tom. The carbon tax is imposed at the before it gets to the gas station. So the price increase is actually from the oil companies earlier. And so whatever that carbon tax bid is, the carbon, it has to do with these carbon credits that are auctioned off, and so that'll be passed on just like it is right now. If the carbon, if it was bid lower, it would be lower. But because of the structure of the CCA, which is the Inslee's Insane Climate Commitment Act, what'll happen is they reduce the number of credits, which inevitably reduces or increases the cost of those credits. And so going forward, that would end up producing greater increases in the cost of fuel. You just don't see that as a specific line item on your tax. The gasoline tax that exists in our state, which were already quite high, on top of the federal funds, isn't going away. I'm not aware of it being discussed seriously as an increase yet, but we'll have to see as some of these taxes are proposed, perhaps in the legislature coming up. The legislative session should be interesting. We'll see Miss Minor Sue if Trump has his way. No more federal dollars for criminals, sanctuary cities. We will see. That's always possible. Listen, it's good news about the U.S. attorneys, provided that they're able to actually put these people in. And again, that blue slip prerogative that the federal senators have typically exercised is one of the reasons why we have had pretty much useless U.S. attorneys for decades in our state, as well as pretty much useless and egregiously incompetent federal judges out here for the same reason. So if they're able to overrule that, we would potentially have very different both federal judicial appointments, especially if the Trump administration is able to kind of rule out this an 8 to 12 year kind of window of conservative policies, then they would be able to truly change the federal district court out here pretty well. Plus, you'd have the opportunity to have these U.S. attorneys that would be aggressive on this, and it'd be a big deal. Let's see. Let's keep going into some of these questions. I will take questions and try to. I'm bypassing the comments. Love your comments. There's a lot of them here. You can all see it here if you look on your screen. I don't know. I'm pointing this way, but it could be, whichever, or maybe it's down here depending on your screen. But lots of great comments. Thanks for doing that. But I'm going to jump to some questions if I can. John McElfresh down below. Do you think anything will come of the complaint of Ferguson's conduct at the start of the election? I don't, actually. And I don't because it's just too much of a stretch, and you're dealing with judges in our state that are ultimately not interested in protecting your freedom and rights, nor do they really care about the rule of law. They do care about the rule of political consequences, and they're not willing to trip that wire unless they really are forced to. So anyway, that will be the way it goes. Mark McConnell, who do you think makes laws? Well, I'm familiar with the practical process. I'm also familiar with the natural rights that all of us are inherently have, and the Bill of Rights simply identifies what those natural processes are. I mean, government exists at the consent of the governed. The name of my channel is We the Governed. That wasn't an accident that I came up with that title. But the practical approach to lawmaking, the day-to-day things that you and I have to fight and deal with in our community, in our state, and living in this country, at a state level, the legislature passes those laws. They're signed by the governor, and they go into effect. The biggest challenge we have with the administrative state is that below that you have an entire body of law, both, and this exists at the federal level, at the state level, but at the state level too, they call it the Washington Administrative Codes, or the WACs. The WACs are invented and come from the imagination of the bureaucrats in the various agencies that are tasked either in a lazy or corrupt or dishonest way by the state government, or they simply exceed what the law says and invent their own rules. And essentially, this level of abuse that hits people's freedom and liberty in narrow slices and straws that break camels' backs all the time would be the greatest thing to roll back if you were really going to truly restore freedom and liberty in a state like Washington. The impact at a federal level, let's just say the federal government genuinely is getting significantly reformed for the first time in a lifetime, many generations, and they genuinely downsize the federal government, getting rid of whole agencies and departments and getting rid of grant grifting and kickback schemes and all this stuff that they are, let's just say they really do make those changes. It seems that there would be a ripple effect at some point where it would hit the states. You wouldn't see it immediately, but even in states that haven't gone down that road, the contrast between states that want to be free and states that want to be abused becomes too much to the difference is so significant, and it ends up rolling even into the states like Washington that have had truly insane and corrupt bad elected officials here. So it takes a little while to emanate that, but we'll see how it goes. Here's a question here. I'm going to bring this up. 5-acre farmer, Eastern Washington, love to be separate from Western Washington. Well, to tell you the truth, there's a good percentage of Western Washington that frankly outnumbers Eastern Washington that wants to be separate from Seattle. So if you actually look, and I'm going to pull the data once they finally certify our month-long election process here, you'll be able to see the number of conservative voters in Western Washington compared to Eastern Washington. That's a worthwhile number to look at, actually, because there's historically, there's always been more conservative voters in Western Washington than there are in Eastern Washington. But the question is, what does Seattle and the lefty crews in the cities bring to the table? Misery, crime, and corruption is usually the top three things that I'll bring out. But that problem and that challenge, it becomes something that you end up having to overcome. Again, I don't see that being super likely, but we'll see how it goes. Ryan Olsky, Bob Ferguson's wife, took out 4 different retirement funds to donate to his campaign funds. Is that legal? Good question, actually. If it's an asset of the candidate themselves, then they are able to loan or put money into the campaign. It's fascinating. I'm not aware of this, by the way, so I haven't independently validated what you've just said, but let's say that's true. If that happened, then there's a limit to how much you can actually refund when you make a loan to your own campaign. You can pretty much put as much money as you want into your own campaign. The question that I have is why he would have done that, considering his fundraising success that he clearly did have with a bunch of lefty groups and the outside money that came in to help him. And so Ferguson was panicking in a way that surprises me, and I did see a level of panic in his political campaign that surprises me a little bit. Which just only shows that inside they're a little more nervous than anybody realizes. John McElfresh, yeah, any chance of making King County its own state? Yeah, we'll see. I mean, that's the kind of thing you can look at. King County is bigger than Hawaii, right? So, and it's probably bigger than it'd be interesting. I haven't compared. Anybody looking at this video could, but it'd be interesting to see how big King County is compared to some of the places. Certainly, it has a population larger than some of the states in America, so that's always possible. The $42 million racketeering and copyright infringement claim against Ferguson by a former prosecutor. Let's just see what actually happens to it. So anyway, we'll find out where it goes. Let's see. Blue Hawks had a new movie idea, Escape from Seattle. Could be, or Escape from Denver or Portland or Chicago or pretty much Olympia or Bellingham or any city that Democrats get control of, San Francisco. There does seem to be a tendency to destroy life and happiness and certainly public safety whenever Democrats get in charge of cities. They can't seem to help themselves. Just for contrast, and I'll mention this again, I don't talk about this all the time, but I do talk about this somewhat frequently, even though I'm a fifth-generation Washingtonian and I grew up out here in a more rural area, but I did grow up in King County originally. And I live in South Thurston County right now, but I lived in New York City before Giuliani, when it was under the Dinkins administration, and when I was going to college back there. So I spent 4 years there under brutal crime conditions that nobody who's alive today in Washington State has any possible conception of what that was like. And in fact, it was crime at a scale that nobody in Washington State's ever experienced anywhere. Hilltop at its most violent era in Tacoma would have been a really sweet neighborhood in Manhattan and Bronx and Brooklyn at the time, compared to what I experienced when I was there. 2,100 people were murdered within 10 miles of my dorm room my sophomore year at Columbia. So violence there was at a scale that you can't even imagine. And it was interesting how bad it had to get before the whole city decided. And this is a city that clearly 15% Republican. And Giuliani was the right guy run at the right time on the right platform against the right clown that the Democrats had, which was Dave Dinkins. One of the most incompetent mayors probably in modern American history. And Giuliani won in that city, and I think crime is what largely put him over the top. I don't think things have gotten bad enough for people in Washington State, even in the Seattle area, to necessarily feel that hit. You see it hitting a little bit in places like San Francisco, where they're getting rid of the DA and deciding that maybe crime should be illegal again. But we'll have to see. So escaping from Seattle is probably one of those things. Unfortunately, when they escape from Seattle, they just move to Bellevue and then vote like they were in Seattle. Ryan Satterley, is there anything Trump can do to get our gun rights back? Yes, there is. He could attach Pam Bondi is new attorney general for a civil rights lawsuit in Washington state. Probably they would not have to initiate it. They could just join a couple that are already in existence and take them to the Supreme Court and overturn a couple of the more ridiculous things they've done in Washington state, from the magazine ban to the assault weapons ban to the other restrictions that have been put on out here. That would be fun to watch and highly unusual for those of us who care about freedom and gun rights. It's highly unusual to have the feds actually jump in constitutionally and civil rights, again, the Civil Rights Division, to help us, and it could happen. That's the easiest path I think that it could happen on. Secondly, though, and even more important than that, I would say, is fixing the federal election reform would be more important, because it would change the underlying basis for and expose a lot of the problems I think we currently have in the election process in Washington state today. Let's see. Jason got a question here. Joe Kent got less votes than Trump did. As much as I like him, I don't see him running again. Who else should run? I don't have an answer to that question. The main thing is, if you're going to run for public office, especially at the congressional level, it's best to do so with a bit of clarity as to who you are, why it matters that you're running, and what it is you're hoping to achieve in running for that area. So, you're going to be more likely to prevail if you want a Republican in that seat, to bring in somebody that's already in political office or in some ways already defined themselves in the community. Yes, I live in the 3rd Congressional District. Please don't ask me to run for Congress. I never want to live in D.C., and I have no interest in ever doing it. But there's going to be some other people that probably step up to decide to take that mantle on and run for it. So we'll see what it is. I would hate to live in D.C. I just have to tell you, I would not. I'm a Washingtonian, and I never want to leave. So I would never want to live in D.C. It's just terrible. Let's see. Enfold, this is a good question. Why do you think you could not find a single attorney to help with the case you mentioned? Did you try to go outside the state? And the answer to that is I didn't try to go outside the state. I needed an attorney that was actually licensed to practice law in the state of Washington, which maybe if I'd had better network, I might have been able to find one somewhere that would have been able to do it. But essentially, it was a campaign. It was actually, if you're familiar with ex-rel cases, it was a citizen action notice under the old statute that existed until they passed the Stop Glenn Morgan bill in 2018. And that allowed me to file cases that Bob Ferguson wouldn't file once he decided it wasn't so fun to go after his political friends. So I filed like 30 of them in court, but I had standing to go after him, and I was going to go after him for his violations of the campaign finance laws at the time. And I had standing to do so. It was kind of a unique case, and I wanted to prosecute it, but I needed an attorney who was willing to jump in and do it, and I just couldn't get, nobody wanted to do it. Attorneys in the state were worried about losing their bar license or being, persecuted or destroyed. I don't see how somebody outside the state wouldn't potentially face that same level of harassment. So we'll just see. But that's what happened. So, and I ran against the statute of limitations. It wasn't statute of limitations time. It was a statute. The law was changed, and as that deadline was approaching, I was trying to get a bunch of my cases in the court system before then. I don't know why they've taken me off their Christmas card list and don't like me so much. Let's see. John McElfresh, is there anything we can do to get the courts in the state to actually follow the law and not push political agendas? There is, but it's actually a more comprehensive campaign that you'd have to run in our state right now because you don't control the appointment process. So you have to put pressure on judges by exposing the corruption. And conservatives have actually been notably incompetent at this and exceptionally ignorant about the process you'd have to go through to start to expose corruption and bad behavior in judges. I mean, one of the things I actually think that we should do is start finding the most ridiculous criminals that are released on their own recognizance or bail is put to zero and they release and they go commit more crimes. The specific judge that approved that decision and the prosecutor that approved that should both become super famous for those choices and those decisions. And if you do a good job with that, you're going to reduce some of the crazier decisions that they have and then go down the line, right? The problem is that judges tend to operate in anonymity, and the only people that really are able to pay attention to them are attorneys or people more familiar with the Odyssey court system on how to dig through it and find and put together. Really, it's a good exercise that we should be paying people to do this right now, documenting and going back to some degree in the historical record and documenting the judges that are the worst and start rating them based on the low quality of judge they are. In our state, we have the ability to run for judge. Judicial races are rarely contested, and we could find those people, but it's ridiculous to do that unless you've laid the groundwork for why that judge needs to be replaced. And you won't do that unless you've done the homework, and you won't get the homework done unless you actually do the homework. And it's hard. It's not easy, and it takes a lot of time. And I mean, just a dumb example recently, the whole Odyssey court system was down probably because it was under a ransomware attack or something, and you couldn't actually even get case files. You couldn't look at anything in the system for weeks. It's kind of been ridiculous. So anyway, we'll see. Let's see. Here we go. Ryan Satterley. I was told if you live within 100 miles of any border, you can have your property searched legally if they're searching for illegals. I am not 100% sure that I know what that law is. So I don't know if that's a myth or if that's truly the law. From a practical standpoint, it's not really the way that people would typically go about deporting criminals. And the approach that the Trump administration at least has come forward with right now is that obviously their big focus is shutting off the border so that no more come in. Second focus, that's simultaneous with that one, but it is about taking the worst of the worst, right? So get the murderers, the rapists, the violent sex predators, the trafficking operations, the theft programs, the Venezuelan drugs, dealers and gangs, getting them deported. So you're going to go through that whole process first. Then you're going to probably move into the scam operations where they've been importing workers from certain countries to steal jobs from Americans. And getting rid of those people would probably be your next thing. And then you just go right down people who are grifting off of the welfare state, people who are taking money, people who are using fake ID, whatever it is. You start to go down that rabbit hole. You're probably a couple years away before you'd ever even be thinking about searching people's property for the potential of finding illegals. I just don't see that as being realistic. I also, frankly, find a certain point in time that they're going to go down. You're going to have to get rid of millions and millions of bad actors and violent criminals and terrible people. And then you get down to the point where you're going to run into categories of people who've come here and maybe they have been here illegally, but you can decide, listen, this person, you should probably decide these on a case-by-case basis, but these people are super productive members of society. They're a net benefit to the community. They're taxpayers, not tax takers, whatever it is, and we will work on a process where they can eventually become citizens. I do remember when I worked up in Bellingham and we had a guy from Switzerland who was on a work visa, temporary work visa at our company as an engineer. Great, just the exact kind of person you want to come here and be in America. Super productive, really smart, very capable, and he went back to visit his family, and then they wouldn't let him back into the country for some paperwork error, and he never showed up again. He was gone. He never came back from Switzerland. So obviously, we do have some problems with our immigration system, but it probably needs to be shrunk substantially as far as how many people we're allowing to immigrate, and qualitatively prioritize people that can clearly provide significant benefits to the country. I don't think you can deny the fact that Elon Musk, who's essentially an immigrant, is a net benefit to America being here. And I can think of several dozen people in my own life that I've met who are immigrants from other countries, came here and are super productive, beneficial additions to our country. So we do want people like that coming in. What we don't want is the bizarre and insane policies that we've seen on display for probably a couple decades now. So let's see. What effect? Robert Von Darth. What effect will abolishing sanctuary city states have on cannabis dispensaries? Well, unless your primary customer base is a bunch of illegal people from other countries, I don't think it's going to have much of an impact at all. Now, maybe that is your customer base, in which case, yeah, you'll be in tough shape. But otherwise, I don't see it having much of a specific impact there. And Jarama Crafts saying here, what do you know about Ferguson and $250,000 on squelching free speech, inferring opposing political opinion is deemed hate speech? Yeah, this has to do with even though Ferguson lost his effort, his proposed bill, which is HB 1333, I'm sure that it may, I don't know, I'm not actually sure, but it might come up again as another stupid idea that the Democrats have thrown into the hopper of a bunch of dumb bills that they'll probably put up. But they put some money into it. It's essentially this effort, University of Washington, some of these other college groups, that they're trying to come up with how do they create a censorship operation. To some extent, it feels like it's an idea that's sort of on the decline anyway, but they still have the money and they need to spend it, and that's why they had that meeting last Friday down at the AG's office coming up with their little schemes and plans. I don't see it going too far, but more important, we have to pay attention. Unless they really, really want to invite, more aggressive civil rights litigation in our state, it just doesn't seem like they're going to want to go down that road. Again, we'll have to see. I mean, the Trump administration talks a big talk right now. I've got the sense, anybody affiliated with them, that they're pretty serious about it. But it doesn't mean there's a big difference between intentions and achievements. So we'll have to see what you're able to achieve. That being said, I wouldn't want to necessarily be in Ferguson's shoes or any of the shoes of these dishonest operators that flock to him, because I think that there's a lot of potential that they could have negative consequences from their perspective by being such criminals and being so bad, but we'll see. I love this state, so beautiful, so special. Imagine if the corruption were caught and stopped. And I like to imagine that all the time, and I hopefully am going to be part of helping on that. Let's see. Brian Diefenbach, I have a bunch of info from here in Spokane related to the migrants and the plans that Latinos in Spokane have. Please direct message me for this info. Okay, well, I'm happy to reach out to you. I will point out that we've had some interesting election results in a couple of parts of the state where the Democrats just presumed, because the Democrats are obsessed, and I don't think they can help themselves. I think they're just racist by nature, and I mean that's kind of what DEI tends to produce. And so they presume that their 14th legislative district in Yakima was going to be their big push to get an Eastern Washington district outside of Spokane that would go Democrat based on the racial ethnicity that they had in that district. And remember, the original district had more Latinos, more Hispanics in it than the currently revised version did. But the Democrats were upset that the Hispanics that were in the original redistricting were too Republican, and you can't be a real Hispanic by Democrat definition if you vote Republican. And they wanted to change the redistricting. Well, in the process of them doing that, the truth is the Hispanic population's become more Republican. And so they failed in their effort there, and it looks like they're going to continue to fail, especially with the increasing Republican vote appearance of a lot of the Hispanic workers. So we'll have to see. Jason, you got a question here. Harris is $10 million in debt. Where did all the money go? Well, it went to her friends and all kinds of people like that. I mean, it's a kickback scheme, man. This is how they run it. It's just like the way they spend your tax dollars. It's about kicking money back to your friends. That's what it is, always been, and that's what it's always going to be. Let's see. Yeah, okay, there we are. Thanks for just confirming that. Yeah, so once you know it's fraud, there is a time limit. This one, the statute of limitations. So it could be that nobody has officially acknowledged this fraud. More mistakes for them, because as that fraud gets exposed, the new clock gets going on the prosecution. So we'll have to see how it is. Let's see. Star, do you think law and order will be restored in Seattle, or is it a lost cause? I'm astounded at the defeatist approach that people take to think that anything's a lost cause. The historic cycles of human nature are such that, cities rise, cities fall, cities get better, cities get worse. Of course, we're limited within our own lifespan, and so it usually just seems endless and bottomless when we look at that. But the reality is Seattle is far from a lost cause. It's just foolishly stupid with the people that you have elected to that city. And I lived in New York City, again, as I'm going to repeat myself, far worse than anything anybody on the West Coast has ever seen or probably ever will see. And I watched it change. It was shocking. Question here, God's gang, will Pam Bondi come after guns? The answer to that is clearly no. The question is, will Pam Bondi be willing to file civil rights cases in states like Denver, like Oregon, like Washington, like California, like Illinois, who are abusing their citizens with civil rights violations and how they treat the Second Amendment? Would she be willing to prosecute them at civil rights cases in those states to restore gun rights and the clear Second Amendment protections that we should all enjoy across this country? She may be required to do that by the Trump administration. They may push her on that, and it doesn't hurt that in their political world, too, they have the extra bonus of grinding an axe against local politicians that they despise and don't like. So I wouldn't be surprised. Let's see, John McElfresh. Good questions, John, today. Would it be possible to start a writing campaign to get the Trump administration to come look at the misconduct here? It is, and I would reach out. It's funny, the Doge campaign, with all this odd, I'm not really clear how they're going to integrate with the federal government, but it's about generating public momentum and interest. And so that's probably where you would find that kind of interesting direction. I don't know. It'd be that there's a lot of opportunity there, I think. Hi, Glenn. How many attorneys would be in the U.S. Attorney's Office? Ooh, Jan, that's a good question. I don't know the number. There's essentially two district offices. One's in Spokane, one's in Seattle. The bigger one's in Seattle. I don't know how many attorneys exist or work there. I could probably look that up. The primary appointment is the U.S. attorney, who works directly for the Attorney General back in D.C., assuming it's Pam Bondi, and she does get the appointment, which I don't know why she wouldn't. Your local U.S. attorneys will work for her. And then those attorneys, in turn, have control over their staff that work in those offices. Probably there's a division within those offices of attorneys that are very experienced, judging from what I've seen in their caseload, with prosecuting, Mexican drug cartel distribution ring or something that falls under the federal criminal statutes that most of the federal courts tend to process all the time. There's a case recently of a drug distribution group of a bunch of people in our state and others. They were all arrested, and they've recently been going to federal prison. So that group of attorneys know what they're doing. They're processing that. What they're really going to lack is the skill set and experience prosecuting public integrity type cases. They're still generally done under a corruption and fraud, most likely, type of investigation. But you're going to need finance guys that are more familiar. It's more of a white collar fraud type structure. So we'll see and money laundering probably, and some other, bank fraud, wire fraud. There's usually a bunch of other stuff like that. So they may be hiring new attorneys or bringing in different people to come in and do that. Probably attorneys from out of state, in a way, just to avoid the possible conflicts of interest that have happened with most of the big law firms in our state over time, since we'll just see. God's gang, will Pam's Bondi be anti-2A? I don't have any indication of that. I'm fully aware of her position when she was Florida Attorney General and she had to defend their own state's red flag laws, but we're way beyond that at this point in time. And the structure that the Trump administration is going to have moving forward, they're not going to be taking away gun rights at the federal level under the Trump administration, as best I can see. So most likely, you got this confluence of Democrat politicians that Trump doesn't like anyway for other reasons, and the opportunity to go after them for civil rights violations, which is a pretty straightforward process, or jumping in. Remember, they don't necessarily have to initiate it. They can jump on to the Second Amendment case that is already with Sporting Systems and Dan, who's already been prosecuting that case. They could jump into that one and kind of give it that kickstart to move up to another level. We'll have to see. Let's keep going down here. I'm trying to find questions, guys, because we are starting running into timeline. So let's see if I can get it going. Here's a good question. Teresa Joy's 2. What is the function of Convention of States? They're asking for Washingtonian support to get President Trump to go with their agenda. Well, I don't like the idea of the Convention of States, and I'll tell you essentially why. You're opening up kind of a Pandora's box that's the equivalent of taking a grenade and pulling out the pin and throwing it into a crowded room and then hoping that somehow at the end of that you don't destroy the existing Constitution and that the left won't take it over and push an agenda that's so bad that nobody would want it. And I'm fully aware of the checks and balances that supposedly exist along this process. But what happens is once you have a convention, it becomes a runaway convention. As frankly, our first convention became a runaway convention when the Constitution was drafted originally. And so you got to remember that the likelihood of this becoming a runaway convention, considering the billions of dollars and the desperation that the left's going to have to somehow retain relevance with their agenda, it's going to be big. What if I was to take because I still think there's a lot of people involved in the Convention of States who share the same objectives and goals that I do about liberty and freedom in our state. I just think that what you should do then at this point in time is run constitutional amendments. It works. You can do it. They've done it. We've done it. Our country's done it many times. Do run some good constitutional amendments that address some of the shared concerns that we have in a freedom and liberty agenda. If you can't pass those constitutional amendments, then you should really be questioning why the heck you think you're going to be able to get a Convention of States out that's going to have a better outcome, because I don't think it will. Let's see. Rebecca Flynn, can you speak on a hate crime hotline? Oh, you know what? I don't know a lot about it, but I mean, this is essentially the same thing as the effort to try to suppress free speech. And obviously, like any of these hotlines, probably most of what they get is a bunch of crap, and it's probably a lot of lies, and just, so there's selective prosecution, if any prosecution at all. But they have to investigate, and they still eventually have to follow the law, and it probably isn't really achieving a lot. But it'd be interesting to have a corruption hotline, and that's probably what the feds should put in next: hardcore corruption hotline, and then see what we find, because I think there's a lot to find in the state. Let's see. All right, no fun questions. That's okay. You can always ask fun questions. I just have to see them here. Let's see. I'm trying to find. Let's see. Star, I'm trying to escape Seattle in real life. I am too conservative for these lunatics, constantly battling with the backwards flying pigeon thinking. Any suggestions, fellow Washingtonians? Well, of course, the way Washington's set up right now, it'd be really funny to, you can still vote here even if you move out, but you could move out of Seattle, move to Eastern Washington, move to Southwest Washington, Skagit County. Any place is going to be better than Seattle. Bellevue, really, frankly, just across the lake, you're going to be in better shape. Let's see. I am trying to find questions here. Carly Minnick, they are reducing funds to restore our highways. I don't know how we are ever going to be able to catch up on our already neglected infrastructure. Your thoughts? Yes, I would completely defund sound transit. Every penny divert it to reducing congestion on the freeways, and that's not a hard choice at all, actually. I would eliminate all the funding that goes into stupid, dumb things like mitigation schemes, soft costs that produce no value and don't lay any pavement or improve the road system in some way at all, or repair bridges and maintain bridges. You simply take that money and you move it out to congestion relief, which would be your main focus, and it would be a pretty big deal. Wolf's Watch, how do you send questions? I don't see a super chat. Yeah, I don't think I have a special super chat. I think, if I remember right, that's where it's set up where you pay to get a special question, and I don't think I have that kind of volume to deal with. I try to do the best and try to catch up as I go along here. But generally, if you type at We the Governed, which it looks like you did down below, at the start of the question, just a little bit easier for me to spot your question. That's the main thing. Let's see. I'm going to keep going because I think there are some good questions. Rex, are background checks being done again? And I believe they are. I'm going to tell you that this whole collapse of the State Patrol's ability to do background checks may be involved in an unreported ransomware attack on the overall network that Washington State has. And I think that it was somehow tied into the Odyssey court system because for the same period of time, ironically, the court system was also down and you couldn't get any legal documents for quite a while. So I think that what you really have is an untold story about a ransomware attack, and I'm curious as to how it ended and how it started. So that affected the background checks, but I think we're back on it now. I know the Odyssey court system's up, so I'm assuming the background checks are up now as well. It was absurd and ridiculous. In a strange sort of way, Lancelot Dufame, yeah. The Stop Glenn Morgan bill is kind of flattering. Yeah, it was. And I wrote an article about it, so you can look at it on my website. And, of course, that was the nickname of the bill. That's not what Inslee called it. But the Democrats called it that internally, and so did the Republicans, and they were laughing about it. And there was an effort. There were actually some reforms I wanted to get through. So you basically follow Lincoln's rule about if you want to repeal a law, you enforce it rigorously, and inevitably that's what happens. And I was able to get some things changed in the campaign finance laws. They didn't really take advantage of the whole opportunity. I think Republicans didn't know how to do that, but anyway, we'll just have to go with it. Jan Davis, thoughts on the wrong think bill of Ferguson? This was HB 1333, yes, but I'm not. There'll be a new version of it. I'm assuming that might come into the laundry this cycle as we start the next legislative session, but I haven't seen that yet, so we'll have to see how it goes. College groups. I'm not sure what you're asking about, but yes, I was a chair of the college Republicans back in the day. I actually tried to start a libertarian club on campus, and that was too difficult. The paperwork was too difficult, so I did what any good activist should do in college, which is take over another group, regardless of the name, and convert it to your purposes, which is what I did with the College Republican. Since I could only find one still on campus, she handed the key to me in a dark alley and ran away, and I never saw her again. And I was able to use that key to get our access to the mailbox, and I was able to roll from there. And my friends and we had a great time, and the leftists hated us, and we actually expanded, became a pretty active group on campus, one of the bigger ones on campus for a while. And I was able to do it with very little money, actually, so it was kind of beneficial. It was quite good. Let's see. I'm trying to get to real questions here, if you got some, before I go. This is a good question. John, you've been asking great questions. Is there any movement on looking into the RTA construction, Puget Sound construction projects? I see new taxes and bonds being passed by Seattle and King County. And the short answer on that is yes. The long answer is it depends on what you're talking about looking into them. I would recommend and strongly request people that are aware of some of the corruption in those projects to start your documentation and make sure you're backing up the files, because at some point in time, we're going to be digging deep into a lot of these projects, I think, and inevitably, if you want to find theft and crime and fraud, follow the money. Government has a lot of it. I don't even know why the why organized crime bothers with the private sector anymore. The government's a much easier place to steal money from. What's your opinion of the First Amendment auditor movement? I don't know, because I'm not totally sure what the First Amendment auditor movement is, actually. So we'll have to see what it is. Let me see if there's any last-minute questions. Oh, yeah, sorry, there's so many. What's your Tom Potlatch? What is your opinion on the state's funds spent on salmon mitigation improvements? Well, that's a big black hole of waste, and that money doesn't help any salmon, but it does help a lot of people who run the projects there make a lot of money. It's one big corruption grift. If it all went away tomorrow, the salmon wouldn't be harmed, and in fact, the world would be a better place for it. So that's what I would do with it, is I'd get rid of it all. Let's see. I'm trying to... do you think, okay, we'll watch. Do you think they pulled information or hacked the background check system for our information? Oh, good question. Actually, that's an excellent question. long and the short of it is, if your private information's in a Washington state government computer database, it's already been hacked. So just sorry to pop your bubble, but we have an incompetent clown show of people who work in our government. It leaks like a sieve, and it's compromised at any and every level that you interact with it. So if you think your information's ever going to be safe with the state, you're wrong. Now, it's not that they won't try to cover up things to protect their friends, but it has been hacked, I'm sure, many, many times. You know, whether you see that hack out there or that information out there, that's a different story, and I'm not sure what they can necessarily do with it, but it's been hacked. All right, guys, I'm getting ready. I'm running out of my time. Let's see. 5 Acre Farmer, thank you, Glenn, for your hard work, and thank you for your comments. So just a quick reminder, I got 3 videos. I filmed them this morning. Got them coming out. One's going to be about Ferguson basically defending the violent illegal aliens and criminals in our state and deciding that that's the first political hill he wants to die on. The second one has to do with an overview of the significance of the federal investigation into the Act Blue scandal, and kind of a follow-up to a video I did about a year ago on it and where it's moving forward now, and it's kind of a big deal. The third issue, and I don't usually get into this topic, but I decided to anyway, that video will probably come out this weekend, is, okay, so you're going to take over your local Republican Party. How do you make it a successful party and not shrink it and make it useless or make it turn into a debating society that goes nowhere? And believe it or not, I actually used some information that I got from the Democrats a number of years ago when I sent somebody in to record one of their meetings, and surprisingly, I actually got some pretty productive and valuable information from them. Of course, that was back before the days when they used to discuss their pronouns and try to figure out what their pronouns were before they could get a meeting started. So anyway, with that, guys, I hope you have a great Thanksgiving. This is my last live stream before Thanksgiving. Should have another one Tuesday, 5:30 next week. Same approach that I'm taking right now. Have your questions ready if you got them. Look at my videos and share them far and wide. If you haven't hit the subscribe and like button, please do that right now. If you get a chance, if you think there's other people you know that want to hear this information, please feel free to share it with others. Live streams are hard to share. I think it's kind of, I mean, I should obviously record these, but they're very long and we go into all kinds of different topics. But I do have a lot of videos that are much shorter, more focused, and probably a little bit more efficient when it comes to the way I'm presenting the information. So with that, hope all as well. Guys, stay engaged, be involved out there. A lot of amazing opportunities are coming on the horizon, and as strange and as weird an environment as we seem to be in worldwide, there's actually the potential for a lot of good things to happen, just like there are a lot of risks that face us in our country. So hope all's well, guys. I always end every one of my videos saying the future belongs to those who show up. I'm going to say the same thing here because I believe that it does. So engage, be involved. Don't forget your family. This is Thanksgiving coming up, and now's the time to be there for them and plan for that next generation. It's a priority for me, as I'm sure it is for you. So thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next time.